Hello, and welcome back to the Ottawa History Hub podcast. My name is Brendan Ray, and we began our long narrative in the last episode, looking at Ottawa before Ottawa was Ottawa, looking back at before it was even land. In this episode, we'll be looking at the people who have lived here since before the English or the French arrived and set up the settlements that would one day become Ottawa. We will learn about the language, home and family structure, religion, as well as transnational cooperation and conflict of the Algonquin people. Once the Champlain Sea made its gradual withdrawal to the Atlantic, and fresh water replaced the brackish, human feet began to walk the forests of the Ottawa Valley. Between 3000 BCE and 1 CE, the St. Lawrence hosted very few humans in a long-term capacity. Gradually migrating upriver from the Atlantic coast, a people called the Anishinaabe came into the area where the Ottawa, the Gatineau, and the Rideau rivers join. For the most part, they looked at the fetid swamps of summer and the brutal cold of winter, and wisely decided to keep on moving, although some stayed in small communities. Those Anishinaabe that stayed in western Quebec and eastern Ontario around the year 1 of the Common Era were to be given the name Algonquin, and they named the river the Kitchissippi, or Great River. This text is an introduction to the Algonquin specifically, and the greater Anishinaabe people on the whole. I am not a member of any indigenous nation, and describing any nation's history in 15 to 20 minutes is possible as long as the audience, which is you, understands the limitations of the media. Today, we'll be looking at an overview to understand some of the basics of pre-contact Ottawa, and that model means that this will be light on detail in favor of a broader picture. At the end, when I conclude, I'll have a collection of sources if you'd like to learn more. I'll do my best to pronounce Anishinaabemowin words, but I will apologize in advance for when I fail to meet that high standard. The Algonquin are an Anishinaabe people, as they speak an Anishinaabe language, called Anishinaabemowin. Just to keep things nice and confusing, Anishinaabemowin is in the Algonquian family, not the Algonquin. Algonquian is a language family that includes many languages that would not at all be intelligible to Algonquin people. A comparison would be that English is a Germanic language, but most English speakers don't understand Elfdalian, a language spoken in a northern corner of Sweden. Anishinaabemowin, on the other hand, was comprehensible to many different nations, including the Algonquin and their allies. The largest groups within the Anishinaabe family would be the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa, but Algonquin, Nipissing, and Mississauga were also significant. Anishinaabemowin was spoken in one form or another from modern-day Saskatchewan to the island of Montreal, throughout the Great Lakes and wide parts of the American Midwest. Over time and distances, there were varieties of Anishinaabemowin spoken amongst these people. The variety would be like someone from London, with a proper received pronunciation accent, speaking to someone from Ottawa. There's variety, but they understand each other. Further away, it could be like somebody from the Scottish Highlands, speaking to someone from the backwoods of Louisiana. They're speaking the same language, but it's hard to communicate. Please remember that there was, and there still is, a lot of linguistic variety among speakers of indigenous languages. There is variety even to the point as to what the exonym Algonquin means. The general consensus is that it means at the place for spearing fishes and eels from the bow of a canoe. An exonym is what other people call you. Algonquin people referred to themselves as Omam Iwinini, which translates as the downriver people. It's important to recall that saying downriver means that they saw themselves as a part of a larger community that was upriver, heading towards the Great Lakes. If they called themselves the upriver people, then they would have thought of themselves as a part of a more Atlantic-based community, which was not the case. In many ways, the St. Lawrence was the periphery of the Anishinaabe world. Ottawa was not the end of the world, but it was your last stop before going off the edge. In and around the year 1 CE, Algonquin settled along the Kitchissippi, or Great River, now called the Ottawa River, but also along the Pasapkeji-Nawong, or Rideau River, and the river that stops your journey, the Tenaga-Dino-Zibi, now the Gatineau River. The Kitchissippi starts at the Lac des Outaouais in western Quebec, then flows west, then south, then east to join the St. Lawrence at the island of Montreal. While many other cultures of the 1st century CE, the Romans, the Persians, the Aztecs, all built many elaborate structures to find and secure fresh water, this was never an issue amongst the Algonquin. Fresh potable water has always been abundant in the area, making aqueducts or other watercourses a non-issue. The Anishinaabe trade network that connected the Great Lakes to the St. Lawrence and the Ottawa River, including the Kitchissippi's 19 tributary rivers, made trade by river much easier than overland haulage. While portages, places where canoes and cargo can be carried from one river or lake overland to another body of water, or avoid rapids or waterfalls, were routine, long-haul canoe-on-water travel was the basis of the trade network. Algonquin and Anishinaabe culture is clan-based, with communities of mixed clans living together. Many of these clans were named after animals, like wolf, bear, loon, or many others. These clans are typically, but not universally, matrilineal, based on the mother's clan. But adoption and enslavement could also bring in new members. Anishinaabe was based on community, not ethnicity per se. Marriage within a clan was verboten, and children of most marriages would typically be thought of as belonging to the mother's clan, though there were several communities where they would join the father's clan. I had this explained to me as maternity is a matter of fact, whereas paternity is a matter of opinion. Algonquin were not nomadic, but settled typically along rivers and lakes that brought fresh water, fish, and waterfowl, and facilitated agriculture. There are over 250,000 lakes in Ontario, and the province is the depot for about 20% of the world's fresh water. Community settlements were relatively small, rarely more than a few hundred, but connected to other nearby settlements through kinship, culture, and commerce. These communities were multi-family, multi-generational settlements with large round houses, like other Anishinaabe settlements, and sometimes long houses, in the style of neighboring Iroquoian peoples. These buildings were often made of wood and bark, with tree sap and animal sinews as bindings, but local materials would vary and often included stonework or clay. Around these homes, agriculture flourished, with the Three Sisters model that was common across North America, the Three Sisters being corn, squash, and beans. That may sound a little repetitive, but there are 59 varieties of corn, over 100 squash, and over 400 types of beans in this world, making for a healthy and varied diet. Different territories were better suited to different varieties, but this model of producing carbohydrate and nutrients-dense foodstuffs that can survive a winter without spoiling, and then hunting, fishing, and gathering for fresh perishables while the season was appropriate, was a common agricultural strategy among Indigenous people across the continent. For preserving fish and game, Algonquin people would smoke fish and occasionally venison, rather than salting the meat, as the Montagnais-Innu would do. This was probably due to the lack of salt harvesting capacity so far away from the sea. In the Ottawa area, there is evidence for the farming of sunflowers, tobacco, and maize going as far back as 800 CE. There is also evidence of coppersmithing on Morrison Island. While the Anishinaabe migrated westerly from the Gulf of the St. Lawrence and the Atlantic Ocean, knowledge of coppersmithing came easterly from the Great Lakes. Copper had been cold wrought in the Lake Superior region as far back as 6000 BCE by the Mississippian and Hopewellian people of the region. But Anishinaabe began the process of smelting and reworking metals by around 1000 CE. The religious practices of the Algonquin people were a part of the normative culture of Anishinaabe people. One group of Anishinaabe might manifest their religiosity quite differently from another in a different place and time, but we're still going to consider them as part of the same tradition as they would have considered themselves. We're not looking at sectarians or monoliths, but general commonalities. Algonquin people had a belief in animism, where different things, animals, vegetables, minerals, can have spiritual or psychological virtues attached to them, totemism, also spelt with a D for dotem, was a common feature, with different clans taking virtues and lessons from their namesakes and being personified within stories. The crane is a diplomat, for example, so a member of the Crane clan would be well suited to that role. With regards to the dotem-totem distinction, in linguistics, T's and D's are vocalized pairs. They move around a lot. Think of the word mist as the past form of the verb to miss, or as mist, the moisture in the air in the morning. One ends with a T, the other with a D, but they sound the same to me. As a Canadian, I speak with what's called an alveolar flap. Don't worry, I don't need to see a doctor about that. What it means is that my T's will often become D's if they are preceded by a stressed vowel and followed by an unstressed vowel. What that means is that I pronounce the word bitter, water, butter, Ottoman, and Ottawa with D's instead of T's. Storytelling was a major venue for social continuity and the keeping of real and mythic history. Many stories involve teaching of virtues through animal spirits, beaver teaching wisdom, eagle teaching love, in a model with many similarities to Aesop's fables. One recurring character in Anishinaabe narratology is Nanaboju, a trickster figure. Originally a feature in Ojibwe narratives, Nanaboju proved popular throughout the Anishinaabe world and was called Tkakabesh amongst the Ottawa River communities. Depicted alternately as a rabbit or hare and a demigod with a spirit father and a human mother, he's a shapeshifter, and he taught humans the religious medicine practice of Midewiwin, as well as fishing, and the syllabic writing system used first for Ojibwe and then later adopted by other groups, in a way similar to how Latin script is used in English or Arabic script in Pashto. A syllabic writing system has characters for syllables, so the word coffee would be 2 syllables, one representing ka and the other representing fi. A phonemic writing system, or alphabet, records individual sounds, so coffee would be 4 letters, k, a, f, and e. English spells coffee with 6 letters because we use Latin, French, and Germanic spelling conventions in a confusing hodgepodge of silent letters, double letters, and archaic pronunciation. English spelling is hard. A note here should be put in about cultural development. Cultural development and change are features of all cultures. At different points over the past millennia, things would appear quite different. The arrival of Europeans and other global populations brought new reactive circumstances into the Ottawa area. It would be problematic to say, in the past, Algonquin people were like X, because it involves a lot of people over a lot of time. This implies to culture, religion, economy, trade, and politics. These groups were then, and still are today, very diverse. Algonquin people lived in communities of various sizes across the Ottawa Valley and southwest Quebec. They lived not in isolation, but within an Anishinaabe polity. They traded, fought, and interacted with other Anishinaabe across the St. Lawrence watershed and the Great Lakes region. The Ojibwe were the most populous Anishinaabe group, along with the Potawatomi, and another very important group, the Odawa. The Odawa are important to our story because the river is named after them, and the city is named after the river. The Odawa lived near Lakes Michigan and Huron, and to a lesser degree, Superior and Erie. Not exactly the Ottawa area. Odawa means to trade or those who trade, and they would travel around by waterways and land across the region and engage in commerce. The reason that the name came to the region so far away from the Odawa territories is that the French in the outposts of the lower St. Lawrence understood that these Odawa arrived by the river, so they called the river the Ottawa, or the Odawa, the Outaouais. The Algonquin didn't trade with the French directly until much later, but at first through the far-traveling Odawa middlemen, and the name just stuck. The legacy of the Odawa traders is found in other communities named Ottawa, in Kansas, Ohio, and even Oklahoma. The Algonquin also interacted with Iroquoian peoples. While typically the Anishinaabe had a positive relationship with the Wendat, also called the Huron, in the upper Great Lakes, their relationship with the Haudenosaunee people, or people of the Longhouse, in the lower Great Lakes and modern-day New York State, was more acrimonious. The Haudenosaunee, sometimes called the Iroquois or the Iroquois Confederacy, were an integrated alliance of the 5 nations: the Mohawk, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Seneca, and the Oneida. They would later incorporate the Tuscarora in 1722 and take on the mantle of the 6 nations. The proximity of the Algonquin and the Haudenosaunee led to certain common elements of history, culture, and economy, but would just as often involve conflict, particularly in times of scarcity. Raiding was common for agriculture and animal resources, as well as control of trade, and often prisoners would be taken and enslaved. While this wasn't the same chattel slavery as was common in the antebellum South, it could hardly be thought of as welcome by the victims. Still, enslaved people could be adopted and integrated into their new communities, and could become translators and intermediaries in the future. You may notice many of these names of Indigenous nations have found their way into learning institutions in the province of Ontario. Mohawk College is in Hamilton, Seneca College is in Toronto, Nipissing University is in North Bay, and Algonquin College of Applied Arts and Technology is the largest college in Eastern Ontario, with 19,000 full-time and 37,000 part-time students. Algonquin Park is 7,653 square kilometers, larger than 30 countries at the United Nations. Algonquin College has named 14 internal pathways and corridors and 4 external roads in its labyrinthine structure after Anishinaabe totem animals. For example, Magua, bear, is in A building. There are also areas with Anishinaabemowin names, such as a district in the library in C building called the Kejeya Dizig Jig Ogaming, or Knowledge Keeper's Place. You may notice that Anishinaabemowin words are often longer than English words. That's because words in Anishinaabemowin collect features that denote action, gender, and situation as they increase in complexity. So the words become longer rather than separate words making a sentence longer, like in English. If you're interested in learning more about Anishinaabemowin, language lessons are taught by request at Carleton University, and they have been offered in the past by the Midewiwin Indigenous Student Support Center at Algonquin College. As I'm recording, however, there are more online resources than in person available. That may change at the time of listening. You can find resources on Ojibwe.net, YouTube, even Pimsleur and Audible.ca have resources, most frequently in the more widespread Ojibwe dialect of Anishinaabemowin. When looking at a map, there are many place names that have Anishinaabemowin roots. Sipi means river, and so we get Kitchissippi for the Great River in Algonquin, as opposed to Mississippi, which means Great River in the Ojibwe dialect. The Kitchissippirini people are the people who live on the Great River, particularly in the Morrison Island area. Kitchigami in Algonquin, or Gitchigumi in Ojibwe, is the Great Sea, or Lake Superior, if you recall the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot. And the Kitchigami Zibi is the Great Broad River, or the St. Lawrence River. Madawa means a confluence of rivers, and so the town of Madawa is where the Kitchissippi River branches off towards North Bay. Madawaska is a series of lakes and rivers just to the southeast of Algonquin Park, which is north to the lands of the Kichimajo Manitou Madawaska Rini First Nation. If you'd like to learn more about Algonquin, I would recommend Algonquin Traditional Culture by a former Algonquin Anishinaabe chief, Kirby White Duck, published by the Council of the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan, of which he happened to have been the chief. It's an older book, published in 2002, but there is a lot of primary resource analysis, making this a much more scholarly work than some of the other materials out there. As I begin to wrap up this essay, this podcast is my land acknowledgement. For centuries before Europeans, Algonquin people were here and continue to be here. The modern nation-state of Canada is not eternal, and was not here for most of the history of the world. I cannot say with 100% certainty how long it will continue to exist in the future. But Algonquin people will still be here, living their lives in sickness and in health, in richness and in poverty, and in good times and in bad. They are not a background chapter or a precursor to modernity, but they are permanent residents on this river of time that we're going to be navigating in this podcast. Not always central, but never absent on this unceded land that we call Ottawa. Thank you for listening. This podcast is written, recorded, and produced by myself, Brendan Ray. As this is a new project, please take a moment to give us a 5-star review on whatever podcatcher you use, or preferably write a short review. This helps the algorithm promote the podcast, which is so essential as I start out. I really appreciate that. You can send me an email at ottawahistoryhub@gmail.com and follow me on Facebook at the Ottawa History Hub or on X Twitter at OttHistoryHub. That's OttHistoryHub. In our next episode, Etienne Brûlé will become the first European to travel up the Ottawa River. Please visit our website at ottawahistoryhub.com to see some pictures of what we've been discussing today and in past and future episodes. Take care, everybody. Advance Ottawa, en avance!